Last year, a game named Fort Solis was announced from a new developer named Fallen Leaf, starring Roger Clark, who played Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2, and Troy Baker, who played Joel in The Last of Us. When people heard those names, they knew the story had to be a banger. These two people play some of the best characters in gaming history. So what's this new game story all about? Fort Solis is a third-person sci-fi thriller that takes place in the future where mankind has expanded their horizons beyond Earth and the planet of Mars is being used for mining important minerals and resources. At Summer Games Fest, Troy Baker said that the project was described to him as the moon meets Dead Space, and by that, he means the psychological aspect. The aspect where the characters' motives and their perception of reality is challenged. So they combine that with the isolation of the industrial style of Dead Space. Fort Solis is a story-based game that's inspired by games like Detroit Become Human, God of War, and Until Dawn. They wanted to look at the narrative techniques that were used in those games really successfully, but also add elements of gameplay. And they wanted to keep it one cut. No edits through the entire game, so the immersion level would be super immersive throughout the whole experience. For that reason, they felt third person is far better for that. Fort Solis will be a one-shot single experience from beginning to end, much like the recent God of War games. So it's going to be interesting to see how the action transitions from one scene to the other without using any traditional cuts. That single shot will take you through the long, lonely corridors that make up Fort Solis's labyrinthine facility. This remote mining post, when fully crewed, is purpose-built to extract minerals from the depths of Mars. It's also the home of the Frontier Better Tomorrow project, which involves the cultivation of plants. This creates a visual contrast between the mining and botany zones of the station. Fallen Leaf believed it was important for players to explore the station properly. And so rather than playing out in movie-style scenes that dictate where you and characters move, like so many other narrative games, you'll be able to freely explore Fort Solis as you wish. The events of the game primarily lead you through both surface and tunnel navigation. You do not have to participate in all of them, but the player will decide if they want an unnerving, more horror-style experience, or if they want a little bit of reprieve, they come to the surface. Upon hearing a distress signal from a mining facility named Fort Solis, our protagonist Jack arrives at the facility only to be met with more questions, and a mystery that only grows deeper as the story progresses. Since Jack is not a soldier, he does not have access to weapons. Instead, the most important piece of equipment in the game is Jack's multi-tool. If you want to learn more about the combat and mechanics in the video game, make sure to subscribe. I'll be going into more detail in my next video. Roger Clark plays protagonist Jack Leary as an engineer who Tinsdale describes as quite vulnerable. Fallen Leaf wanted Clark on the basis of his incredible performance as Arthur in Red Dead Redemption 2, which was a showcase for his motion capture skills. At the start of the story, Jack has answered an alarm call from Fort Solis. He thinks it's a system malfunction. He needs to go and see if the systems are okay. As events transpire, he realizes that it's not a malfunction. But later stages will allow you to swap characters with your companion Jessica, portrayed as Julia Brown. Jessica and Jack's dynamic is particularly inspired by the central pairing of Henry and Delilah in the game Firewatch. But unlike Firewatch's Delilah, Jessica becomes a much more immediate presence in the game. They have a chit-chat system between the two, a lot of banter going back and forth, and then later in the game she becomes playable in certain segments. Finally, there's Troy Baker, the third and final headline in Fort Solis. Wyatt Taylor, Troy's character, is probably the most complex, and probably the biggest character in the game. He goes to quite a few different vulnerable states. He's not a movie villain, he's a doctor. He's very concerned with what's happening at Fort Solis. The writing seems to look really good, and the characters in Fort Solis seem to be very complex, with understandable motives and compelling character arcs that unravel throughout the story. As stated earlier, Fort Solis takes inspiration from companies like Quantic Dreams and Supermassive Games. So naturally, choice and consequence mechanics will play a huge role in this game. You get to choose your preferred path at several critical points in the story, and the choices that you make during these moments will ultimately dictate which one of the many endings you get. Fort Solis is a highly atmospheric game, and it's all brought to life in a beautiful manner, a highly evocative world that would be a joy to explore. There will be a sandstorm that will continue to worsen as you make your way through the story. The indoors, on the other hand, provides a different kind of traversal challenge. Key sequences are the big cinematic moments in the game, but they wanted to make them completely playable. They also wanted different paths within these key sequences, like if you don't participate or if you put the controller down, what happens next? If you really participate successfully, do you get a completely different outcome? They really wanted that to be a factor in these huge cinematic moments. These key sequences are reserved for the most adrenaline-fueled segments of the story. As a thriller though, Fort Solis will naturally be filled with dramatic high points delivered through its characters, but with the facility itself abandoned, Fallen Leaf had to use classic video game methods to add characters to the story without them actually being there. So they will be using video logs that are really expressive and sometimes can be quite haunting as well. So you've got Jack, who's really loose, you've got Jess, who's really smart, and you've got Taylor, who's just very strict into the book. Hopefully the three of them give three different perspectives of the events of Solis. And when it's all said and done, and the dust is settled, they want you to decide which one you think was right. Because hopefully with the narrative, players should have the choice in the end. Not in the terms of the game, but in the terms of what their thoughts are. Away from the screen, when they put down the controller, who do they agree with? Yes, Fort Solis has multiple endings based on branching pathways. They really wanted their big moments to have really decisive outcomes. Every big moment should change the characters in some way, have some kind of effect on them. There's always a cost to these actions, you know, the butterfly effect. So they thought that it would be cool to up the ante throughout the game, leading up to the final scene. There's a link in the description if you want to buy or pre-order the game. This game really looks like it's going to be a good one for all you story-driven gamers out there. Let me know if you plan on buying the game. AK out.